My name is Rachel, and at 38 years old, I never imagined a single resume could turn my world upside down in an instant. I was sitting in my sunlit office in downtown Austin, my coffee cooling beside my laptop, when I saw the name that made my heart stop: Ryan Thompson, my ex-boyfriend, the same one who had forced me to make a choice 3 years ago. Choose right now, me or your stupid startup. I leaned back in my chair, my fingers tracing the edge of the desk, trying to steady my racing thoughts. How could the world be this small? Austin's tech scene is close-knit, yes, but this was uncanny. I remembered that night vividly, the tension in his eyes, the quiet desperation in my voice as I laid out what I wanted from our relationship, and the heartbreak of realizing that my dreams and his love had collided in a way that forced me to choose. And now, the universe had delivered him right back into my professional life. He was applying for a position at the company I now managed. The same man who once made me feel like I had to compete with my own ambitions for his attention, sitting unknowingly, or maybe knowingly, under my scrutiny as a potential hire. I exhaled slowly, letting the memory of those nights filled with arguments, compromises, and suppressed tears drift to the surface. Ryan had been confident, passionate, and determined, qualities I once adored, but also someone who couldn't imagine a life where my career mattered as much as our relationship. Back then, I chose my career, and it had worked out spectacularly. My startup had been acquired, and my team and I had built a life of independence, ambition, and stability. But the thought of facing him across the table, seeing that familiar mix of arrogance and vulnerability, sent a shiver down my spine. I shook my head, trying to clear my thoughts. He had no idea that the woman he once challenged would now hold all the cards. And yet a small part of me, a curious, almost guilty part, wondered how he had changed. Was he still the same man who underestimated my drive? Would he recognize the person I'd become in the 3 years since we parted ways? The clock ticked loudly in the quiet office, and I realized just how surreal it was. I, a senior product manager with a growing team, was about to interview my ex-boyfriend. The irony was almost laughable, except for the tight knot of nerves and anticipation coiling in my stomach. And I couldn't shake the thought that, after all this time, I was about to confront the very past that had shaped me into who I was today. My Monday just became infinitely more complicated. I was 25 when I first met Ryan. I had just graduated with my degree in marketing and landed a position at a tiny startup that smelled of ambition, espresso, and the faint whiff of anxiety that clung to every coder who thought they were on the verge of changing the world. I was determined, driven, and maybe a little naive, believing that hard work alone could bend the universe to my will. Ryan was the opposite in so many ways. He was a software developer, quiet but sharp, with an energy that drew people in without him trying. I noticed him during a networking event for Austin's young professionals, standing near the coffee station with a cup in his hand and a subtle smile that made me feel like he saw straight through me. We started talking about the usual small talk, projects, weekend plans, but I quickly realized that conversations with him weren't small at all. He had a way of making every topic feel like it mattered. From that night on, we were inseparable, or at least as inseparable as two young professionals chasing their careers could be. Weekend coffee dates turned into dinners, dinners into movie nights, and soon we were planning holidays together. Ryan was attentive, charming, and, for a while, everything I wanted in a partner. But even then, I noticed the little things, the way he'd check his phone constantly, the subtle sigh when my work demanded late nights, the quiet tension whenever I mentioned ambitious projects. I brushed it off, telling myself it was normal. He had his career, I had mine. We were young, after all. I tried to include him in my world. I'd take him to networking events, introduce him to colleagues, and even invite him to brainstorm sessions at my startup. But I started to notice his frustration. "You're always working," he'd say, leaning against the counter in my apartment, tired eyes searching mine. "Do you even want a life outside this?" I remember the sting in his voice, the way he wanted me to scale back, to make room for us in ways that seemed impossible without sacrificing my own goals. I understood where it came from. He was used to stability, to plans that were clear and predictable. But I couldn't give him that, not then. Our relationship wasn't just about us, it was also entangled with our families. My parents, supportive but cautious, often asked if I was settling for a life that would distract from my ambitions. His parents, on the other hand, loved me, but subtly reminded me that Ryan's happiness mattered too. Dinner conversations would revolve around compromise. She's smart, but are her priorities aligned with ours? I sensed the judgment behind their polite questions, the way family expectations piled up silently, pressing against the fragile balance of our young love. And yet, amidst the tensions, there were moments of bliss. I remember a rainy Saturday when we walked through Zilker Park, laughing under the umbrellas, our shoes soaked, our hair plastered to our faces. We talked about the future, about companies we wanted to build, cities we wanted to see, and how we'd figure it all out together. Those moments were real. They were why I stayed, why I believed that love could coexist with ambition. But the signs were there, small but persistent. His frown when I stayed late at work, the disappointment when I mentioned late-night hackathons, the subtle digs when I celebrated wins he hadn't predicted. I noticed, but I ignored them. Love, I thought, was worth bending for. I was wrong. By the time the ultimatum came, choose me or your career, I had already spent 3 years trying to prove that my ambitions could coexist with our relationship, but it couldn't, and that choice, as painful as it was inevitable. I chose my career, believing that the right person wouldn't make me pick. And I was right, not about us, but about myself. Even before the ultimatum, I could feel the tension between Ryan and my ambitions simmering quietly, like a storm gathering on the horizon. It wasn't dramatic at first, just small things. He would sigh when I mentioned late nights at the startup, glance at his watch impatiently during our coffee dates, or make comments about wasting time on projects that might never succeed. At first, I laughed it off, telling myself that he cared, that he just didn't understand the pace of the tech world. But the signs were persistent, subtle, and eventually unavoidable. Our friends noticed it too. They'd comment, half joking, half serious, "You two seem perfect, except for the 70-hour work weeks." Or, "Ryan seems stressed. Are you sure she's treating you right?" I smiled, deflecting, insisting that love and ambition could coexist. I wanted to believe it, desperately. But there were moments when Ryan's eyes would cloud with frustration, when he would go quiet during a dinner conversation, and I could feel the walls creeping in. Family interactions only made it worse. His parents adored me, but they had expectations too. They'd ask subtle questions about our future. "Do you think she'll slow down once you two settle in?" Their concern wasn't cruel, but it added weight to an already heavy situation. I felt the pressure from every angle, the startup's demands, my own ambitions, Ryan's quiet dissatisfaction, and his family's expectations. It was like juggling glass balls, each one reflecting a version of the life I wanted but might never have. Then came the small cracks that truly seeded the conflict. There were times he would cancel plans at the last minute, claiming he wanted to talk, but instead bringing up complaints about my schedule. I remember one night he sat on my couch, arms crossed, voice low but sharp. "I just don't know if we can do this. You're always elsewhere, even when you're here." The words were careful, almost gentle, but they cut deeper than any argument. I tried to explain, to bridge the gap, but he shook his head, frustrated by my explanations about equity, long-term growth, and the unpredictable nature of startups. Work events became battlegrounds. He'd accompany me to networking dinners or launch parties, but his enthusiasm was strained. He would frown when I mingled with investors, mutter under his breath when I discussed new projects, and occasionally glance at the exit, like he was waiting for the moment when he'd have to step in. It wasn't malicious. It was just the way he tried to assert himself in a relationship where he felt out of control. Even our quiet moments were tinged with unease. I noticed the way he would scrutinize my emails on his phone, the subtle impatience when I answered calls or responded to messages from colleagues. He didn't want to be intrusive, but the tension was palpable. I remember lying in bed next to him, hearing him sigh, wondering if love alone was enough to carry us through a life so clearly divided by ambition and expectation. These moments planted seeds of doubt in both of us. For Ryan, it was the fear that I was too consumed by my career to prioritize our relationship. For me, it was the realization that no amount of love could smooth over the friction between two fundamentally different worldviews. I still loved him, fiercely, and I believed in us, but the undercurrent of dissatisfaction was growing, spreading quietly but steadily, shaping the choices we would soon face. Looking back, I can see now how these small conflicts foreshadowed the ultimatum. They were warnings, invisible threads weaving through our days, hinting at the inevitable breaking point. And yet, I didn't see them clearly then. I was too focused on proving that my ambitions didn't have to come at the cost of love. Little did I know that proof would demand the hardest choice of my life. It was a Friday night in November, and I was exhausted. The startup had demanded a late presentation to investors, my mind buzzing with metrics, projections, and strategies. I had been looking forward to a quiet weekend with Ryan, a small getaway he had planned to San Antonio, but as usual, work had crept in, like a shadow refusing to leave. I walked into his apartment around 10 o'clock p.m., my laptop bag slung over my shoulder, my coat still damp from the rain. He was standing in the kitchen, arms crossed, eyes scanning the floor as though he was rehearsing what he was about to say. His apartment smelled faintly of the vanilla candles he liked, but tonight that scent did nothing to soothe the tight knot in my chest. "We need to talk," he said. Simple, calm words, but the tone carried weight, like a gavel striking in an empty courtroom. I set my bag down, heart already hammering. "Okay, what's going on?" He didn't answer immediately. He pulled out a folded piece of paper from the counter and handed it to me. I unfolded it carefully, my eyes scanning the neatly written list of grievances. Every bullet point was a careful observation of where I had failed to meet his expectations. Late nights, missed date nights, my obsession with my startup, my inability to prioritize our relationship. I felt my stomach churn. He was right in a way. I had spent hours coding, pitching, strategizing, hours that had once been ours to share. But the anger that surged wasn't just from guilt. It was from the realization that nothing I did could convince him that my ambitions mattered, that my dreams were not a threat to us. "Ryan," I started, my voice tight. "I've been working so hard because this is important. For me, for my future. I didn't mean to—" "You need to choose," he interrupted, eyes locking onto mine with a gravity I couldn't escape. "Your career or me. I can't do this anymore. I feel like I'm competing with a ghost of you that only shows up between coding sessions and investor calls. I love you, but I can't keep losing to a job that might never work out." The words hit me like a physical blow. I could feel my knees weakening, my chest tightening, my hands trembling. Part of me wanted to cry, part of me wanted to scream, but most of me understood. I understood that this wasn't just about work. It was about belief. His belief in what I was doing, and more painfully, the lack of it. I sat down on the edge of the sofa, taking a slow breath, trying to steady my thoughts. "You're asking me to choose because you don't believe in me," I said softly. "Not because my career is too much, or I'm neglecting us, but because you don't think it will succeed." He flinched slightly, as if my words had struck true. Maybe I don't. Maybe I just don't want to watch you gamble our future away on something that seems like a fantasy. I swallowed hard. "Ryan, I get it. I really do. But the truth is, I've spent my life watching people, my dad, other couples, give up on their dreams for the sake of practicality. And I promised myself I wouldn't do that. I love you, I do, but I cannot betray who I am for someone who doesn't trust in what I can build." The silence that followed was unbearable. His expression softened, but his shoulders sagged in defeat. "So, this is it?" I nodded slowly, tears pricking my eyes. "I choose my career, Ryan, and I hope you find someone who can give you what you need. I truly do." For a long moment, the room was filled only with the sound of rain tapping against the windows. His eyes glistened, but I didn't see anger, just heartbreak. And somewhere, buried beneath my own pain, I felt a sense of grim clarity. The right person wouldn't make me choose between love and my dreams, and by making me choose, he had shown me exactly who he was and who I needed to be. He finally nodded, a small, resigned gesture. "I guess I can't stop you, can I?" "No," I said softly, voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. "You can't, and neither can anyone else. I have to live my life my way." That night, as I walked out into the rain-soaked streets of Austin, I felt both shattered and strangely liberated. The choice had been excruciating, but in that pain, I discovered a truth that would carry me through the next 3 years. Believing in myself was worth more than seeking validation from anyone, even from someone I loved with all my heart. The first few days after that night were a blur of rain, coffee, and sleepless hours. I went back to my apartment, my safe haven, but it felt different somehow. Smaller, emptier, more fragile. Every corner reminded me of him, the way his jacket hung on the coat rack, the mug he always left on my kitchen counter, even the faint scent of his cologne that still clung to my hoodie. I told myself I was fine. I told myself that choosing my career was the right decision, that it was the only choice I could make without betraying myself. But deep down, I felt the ache of loss more intensely than I expected. It wasn't just losing a partner, it was the shattering of a shared future, a vision we had painted together in brighter, simpler colors. I spent hours replaying the conversation in my head, analyzing every word, every expression. Did I say it too harshly? Could I have softened the blow without betraying my principles? My mind was a storm of what-ifs, and the more I turned it over, the more I realized the weight of my decision. I had chosen ambition over love, but not because I didn't care. I had chosen it because I cared about who I was becoming. Friends noticed the change almost immediately. "You seem distant," one of them remarked during a lunch meeting. I smiled, shrugged it off, but inside I was unraveling. Talking about it only made the pain sharper. Every sympathetic word felt like a reminder that what I had lost was real and permanent. I tried to immerse myself in work. Long hours at the startup, coding late into the night, chasing every potential investor, every pitch, anything to distract myself from the emptiness. Yet even in the glow of the computer screen, I couldn't escape Ryan's absence. His critiques, his frustrations, even his presence on the couch that Friday night, they haunted me. Not in a bitter, angry way, but as a reminder of love lost and lessons painfully learned. I questioned myself constantly. Did I overestimate my ability to balance love and career? Had I been too stubborn, too proud, too obsessed with avoiding the fate I saw in my father's life? I remember staring out my apartment window, the Austin skyline glittering under a veil of rain, whispering into the night. Did I make the right choice? Was it worth it? And then came the moments of quiet clarity. Alone in the small hours, I began to understand that my grief was not a reflection of failure, but of growth. Choosing my career didn't mean I didn't value love. It meant I valued integrity, ambition, and the chance to build something lasting for myself. Ryan's ultimatum had forced me to confront the reality that not everyone could embrace the risk. Not everyone could believe in a dream that didn't yet have a guarantee. I allowed myself to mourn. Tears fell in waves, sometimes quietly while typing code, sometimes loudly while walking through the rain-soaked streets. Each tear was a small exorcism, a release of the confusion, guilt, and sorrow that had clung to me. But amid the grief, a strange sense of empowerment began to emerge. I realized that my heartbreak was not the end of me. It was the beginning of a self I had never fully allowed to exist. I began to journal, writing letters I would never send to Ryan, pouring out every thought, every feeling, every frustration and regret. I'm sorry you felt unheard. I'm sorry our dreams didn't align. I hope you find someone who shares your view of life, but I also hope I never compromise my own again. The act of writing grounded me, turning chaos into something tangible, something I could confront and eventually release. By the end of the week, I had made a decision that surprised even me. I would continue to pursue my startup with the same relentless drive, but I would also set boundaries, carefully, deliberately. I would not let anyone's disbelief in me shape my destiny. And most importantly, I began to see that loss was not weakness. It was a catalyst for understanding my own worth, for realizing that the life I wanted was worth fighting for, even if it meant walking away from someone I loved deeply. The weeks after that night blurred together, but the tension didn't fade, it intensified. Ryan tried to keep contact, sending texts that were equal parts apology and persuasion. "I know I hurt you," he'd write. "Can we talk? I miss us." Each notification on my phone made my chest tighten, a mix of anger, grief, and longing I refused to admit to anyone. Friends began to notice the friction from both sides. Some tried to mediate, suggesting that we compromise. "Maybe you could just take a step back?" one friend asked gently, almost pleadingly. It doesn't have to be all or nothing. I appreciated their concern, but the truth was, compromise in this case meant betraying myself. Every time someone suggested bending for love, I felt a subtle, rising resentment, not toward them, but toward the idea that my dreams could be negotiable. Ryan's family complicated things further. His parents, who had always been warm toward me, began asking questions I couldn't easily answer. "Are you sure this is sustainable?" his mother would say, worry etched in her face. "We just want her to be happy and safe." But their concern, though sincere, felt like judgment. They didn't see the late nights, the investor meetings, the painstaking coding sessions that consumed my every thought. They saw only the surface, a woman who prioritized work over love. Even Ryan's friends seemed to take sides. Some subtly echoed his concerns, dropping comments about my unrealistic goals. It wasn't overt hostility, just quiet doubt that crept in like smoke through a cracked window. I began to notice these small shifts, and it fueled my anxiety. Suddenly, everything felt heavier. I was not only defending my relationship, I was defending my existence, my choices, my very right to dream. Then came the small, unavoidable confrontations. One evening, Ryan showed up at my apartment unexpectedly. I had been preparing for an investor pitch, pacing around my living room, when there was a knock at the door. I opened it to find him standing there, rain dripping from his coat, eyes flashing with a mix of frustration and desperation. "We need to talk," he said again, his voice firmer this time. I took a breath, trying to calm the storm brewing in my chest. "Ryan, we already talked. What more is there to say?" He stepped in without waiting for an invitation, ignoring the protests lodged in my voice. "You don't get it," he snapped. "You keep hiding behind your work, thinking it protects you, but it doesn't. I'm part of your life, whether you admit it or not, and I'm tired of being ignored." His words hit a nerve. "Ignored?" I repeated, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay composed. "Ryan, I've been pouring everything into building something real. Do you think this is easy? Do you think success just falls into your lap?" He shook his head, running a hand through his damp hair. "It's not about easy, it's about choice. And every day, I feel like I'm losing you to a dream that might never matter. We could be building a life together, but you're too busy proving something to the world." The tension was suffocating. I felt my heart pounding, my hands clenching into fists, my throat tight with unshed tears. I realized, painfully, that no matter how much I loved him, the gap between our worlds was widening. His presence, once comforting, now felt like a weight pressing down on me, constricting my ability to breathe, to act, to be myself. Work became an even more critical escape, but even there, the pressure followed me. Investors were impatient, meetings endless, deadlines unforgiving. The very thing that gave me life, the startup, was now a battlefield where personal pain and professional ambition collided. Every pitch I gave, every line of code I wrote, was shadowed by Ryan's words, by his disbelief in me, by the fracture in the life I had imagined for us. The escalation reached its peak when I discovered that some of Ryan's friends had been subtly feeding him information about my work habits, hours, and investor interactions. I wasn't naive. I knew people talked. But seeing the information curated into a narrative of, "She's too focused on her career, she's ignoring him," made my blood boil. I realized that the world I had trusted to validate my ambition was being painted as the very reason for my failure in love. That night, I sat alone in my apartment, staring at the city lights reflecting in the rain-soaked streets below. I felt a complex mix of anger, sadness, and determination. I knew then that the confrontation with Ryan, his friends, and even his family wasn't just about love. It was about control, perception, and belief. They could try to question my choices, manipulate my narrative, or press me to bend, but they could never take away the conviction I held for my dreams. I made a silent vow. No more guilt, no more defending myself to people who didn't understand. I would continue building, continue striving, and if that meant losing people who couldn't believe in me, so be it. I was ready to face the fallout, whatever it might bring. The days blurred into nights, and the nights into long stretches of sleepless introspection. I started to feel like I was living in a space that belonged to someone else, a room full of dreams I had built alone, yet constantly questioned by everyone else. Even my friend's well-meaning advice began to feel suffocating, like reminders of what I had lost and what I was choosing wrongly. I remember one evening sitting on the edge of my couch, staring at the blank wall. Rain drummed softly against the window, a steady, rhythmic beat that matched the hollow feeling in my chest. The apartment smelled faintly of coffee and cold takeout, reminders of nights spent working and eating alone. I felt tired in a way that went deeper than muscles or sleep deprivation. My spirit felt heavy, bruised by the friction between desire, duty, and love. Memories of Ryan came unbidden. I recalled the warmth of his hand in mine, the way his eyes had sparkled when he talked about some trivial dream or joke, the shared laughter that once filled my apartment. And then, almost cruelly, I remembered the Friday night ultimatum, the way he had demanded that I choose him over my future. The sharp sting of betrayal was fresh again, but now it mixed with self-doubt. Had I been too harsh? Too stubborn? Had my pride cost me the love I had once thought unshakable? I tried to reach out to him once, hoping that maybe a conversation could soothe the storm, but his responses were distant, polite, but guarded. It felt like we were speaking two different languages. He was speaking of compromise and emotion, while I was clinging to principle and self-preservation. That realization cut deeper than any argument ever could. I was alone, not physically, but emotionally isolated in a world that suddenly seemed far colder than I remembered. Work, the very thing that had once been my sanctuary, began to feel like a trap. Every investor meeting, every pitch, every email became a reminder of the sacrifices I had made. The excitement that had fueled me now mixed uneasily with exhaustion and isolation. Even my team noticed my quiet withdrawal. "Are you okay?" one of them asked, concern in their eyes. I smiled weakly, nodded, and returned to my laptop, feeling the familiar pang of loneliness that had no remedy. At night, lying in bed, I felt the weight of every choice pressing down on me. The dreams I had fought for, the goals I had chased with reckless determination. They all seemed tinged with loss. I missed connection. I missed support. I missed being able to share victories without guilt or explanation. And yet I knew deep down that giving in, bending for love, or seeking reassurance from Ryan would undermine everything I had built. Tears came quietly at first, then in heavier waves. I let myself feel the grief fully, for the future I had imagined with Ryan, for the simplicity of shared laughter and ordinary life, for the moments that would never come. But amid the sorrow, a small spark persisted, a stubborn refusal to surrender entirely. Even in the depths of despair, I realized that my dreams were mine alone, and no heartbreak, no ultimatum, no disappointment from others could erase them. It was during one of these sleepless nights that I began to see the faint outlines of clarity. I realized that my darkness was temporary, a necessary passage through which I had to walk to understand my own strength. The pain wasn't a sign of weakness. It was a reminder that I had dared to love and dared to pursue something bigger than comfort. I recognized that my identity wasn't defined by Ryan's acceptance or anyone else's approval, but by the conviction I held in my own potential. For the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to plan, not for reconciliation, not for forgiveness, not for revenge, but for a life where my choices were my own. I imagined meetings conducted with confidence, pitches delivered with authority, late nights filled with purpose instead of guilt, and I imagined a future where I could be both ambitious and fulfilled, without compromising the essence of who I was. The darkness hadn't lifted entirely, but I could see a way forward. I understood that to climb out, I had to let go, not just of Ryan, but of the haunting what-ifs that had kept me tethered to the past. The emptiness that had felt suffocating a few days ago now felt like a space where new growth could take root. The storm was far from over, but I was ready to face it. The morning after my darkest night, I woke with a strange mix of exhaustion and determination. The city was quiet, the sun casting a soft glow over my apartment. For the first time in weeks, I didn't reach for my phone. No messages, no updates, no reminders of Ryan's presence in my life. The silence was heavy, but it felt like mine. I sat at my desk with a cup of coffee, scanning my inbox, and something caught my eye. A follow-up from a recent investor meeting. A small acknowledgement of my progress, an expression of confidence in our startup. Reading those lines, I felt a surge of clarity. The world outside had not stopped spinning. My goals were real, my achievements tangible, no amount of doubt, heartbreak, or external pressure could erase that. Later that day, I met with a mutual acquaintance, someone who had remained neutral throughout the turbulence between Ryan and me. Over lunch, the conversation drifted naturally, and then, almost casually, they said, "You know, Ryan's been talking about you. Not in the way you think, more like he's realized what he lost." For a moment, I felt a flicker of old emotions, curiosity, maybe even a shadow of longing, but I caught myself. I listened instead, carefully dissecting their words. They weren't trying to manipulate me. They were providing perspective. And what I saw was this. The power had shifted. I was no longer at the mercy of someone else's opinion, of someone else's belief in my worth. That afternoon, I revisited my application review stack. Ryan's Résumé was still there. I realized I had a choice to make, not just about a hiring decision, but about how I defined myself in relation to my past. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need validation. I needed integrity, clarity, and alignment with the person I had become. I drafted my notes meticulously, reviewing her answers, her experiences, and the qualities she had brought to previous roles. I compared them to the other candidates, analyzing objectively. And then, in that process, I felt a quiet, undeniable power, the authority to act decisively, to assert my values, and to uphold the standards I believed in. Not as a punishment, not as an assertion of superiority, but as a conscious choice grounded in principle. Later that week, I spoke to HR and confirmed my decision. Ryan would not be moving forward in the hiring process. I crafted the rejection email with care, professional, courteous, and devoid of personal commentary. When I hit send, I felt a weight lift. Not because of victory, not because of some petty sense of justice, but because I had reclaimed my autonomy. In the evenings, I began to reflect more deeply. I revisited the conversations with Ryan, the arguments, the ultimatums, the sleepless nights filled with doubt and longing. And then I realized something profound. The choice I had made 3 years ago, choosing my career, my dreams, over immediate comfort, was never about him. It had always been about me. I thought about the version of myself that had stayed silent, that had doubted, that had allowed others' opinions to shape her worth, and I acknowledged her pain, her fear, and her resilience. Then I let her go, making room for the person I had become, confident, self-assured, and unapologetically committed to her own path. That night, I called a friend I hadn't spoken to in weeks, someone who had quietly supported me through the tumult. "I think I finally understand," I said, my voice steady but soft. "I'm not angry. I'm not bitter. I'm just me, and that's enough." The following days felt different. Meetings with investors no longer carried a shadow of doubt. Every line of code I wrote, every pitch I prepared, felt infused with intention. The storm of external pressures, the friends, the family, the haunting memories, remained, but it no longer controlled me. I had found a way to navigate it with grace and authority. And in that newfound clarity, I began to understand the real lesson. Life doesn't just test our talents, it tests our values, our commitment to ourselves, and our courage to act when the world is watching. By holding firm, by asserting my principles, I had not only preserved my integrity, but also set a precedent for every future decision. For the first time in years, I felt fully alive, not because I had everything I wanted, but because I had everything I needed: self-respect, clarity, and the courage to choose myself. The turning point wasn't about defeating someone else. It was about embracing who I had always been, unapologetically and entirely. By the time I stepped into the office the next Monday, everything had shifted. Not externally, but internally. I moved with a calm confidence, aware of the choices I had made and the power I now held, not over anyone else, but over myself. The interview was behind me, the decision finalized, and for the first time, the lingering tension around Ryan felt irrelevant. Word travels fast in a small city, and in a tech community as tight-knit as Austin, my decision inevitably rippled. Colleagues who had only known fragments of our history began to notice a subtle change in my demeanor. I was no longer defensive, no longer hesitant. My calm authority carried weight. Even those who had doubted my capability before now treated me with a quiet respect that was previously absent. As for Ryan, the aftermath was immediate. I heard through mutual connections that his pride had taken a hit. He had expected either sympathy, conflict, or some sort of vindication. Instead, he faced the mirror of his own choices. The audacity of applying to a company where I held authority, expecting familiarity to tilt favor in his direction, had backfired. Colleagues who once viewed him as confident and assertive now whispered about his miscalculation. His past dismissiveness, his inability to trust the process, and his lack of strategic foresight became painfully clear. The company's social dynamics subtly shifted as well. Ryan, now fully aware of the professional and personal misalignment between us, was no longer part of the conversation, except as a case study in boundaries, professionalism, and resilience. The professional community seemed to respect that I had managed the situation with integrity. I hadn't gossiped, hadn't demeaned him, and hadn't let personal history influence my judgment. In a way, this reinforced my standing even more. People admired the quiet strength of a leader who could separate emotion from decision-making. That evening, I walked through downtown Austin, letting the cool air wash over me. Neon signs reflected on wet streets from a brief rain earlier in the day, creating a city that felt both familiar and newly alive. I realized that Ryan's absence in my life wasn't emptiness. It was freedom. Freedom from second-guessing. Freedom from compromises that didn't align with my values. Freedom from the emotional weight of someone who never truly saw my potential. Family and friends noticed the difference too. My closest friends, who had stood by me quietly through the uncertainty, finally saw the resolution. Their congratulations were quiet, yet filled with admiration, not for defeating Ryan, but for asserting myself, for navigating complexity with integrity, and for refusing to sacrifice my vision for someone else's comfort. In private moments, I reflected on the irony of the entire situation. 3 years ago, the ultimatum had seemed like the end of the world. Choosing my career over him had been agonizing, a decision that felt cruel and lonely. And yet, that same decision had set the stage for the life I now led. The startup that was a gamble became a platform for professional fulfillment, financial security, and personal growth. I could not have anticipated that my adherence to principle would result in a life more aligned with my deepest values than any compromise ever could. Even Ryan's attempts to reach out, calls, messages, tentative coffee invitations, were met with calm detachment. I responded when necessary, politely, but never allowed history to blur the boundaries I had established. The lesson was clear. People who fail to support your growth are not enemies, but they are not allies either. Their absence, when embraced without bitterness, is liberating. Work flourished. My team responded to the clarity and decisiveness I projected, taking on challenges with renewed energy. Projects that had previously felt daunting suddenly became manageable under the momentum of my renewed leadership. Every success was a reminder that my priorities had been aligned correctly, that my perseverance, even in the face of heartbreak, had tangible results. As the weeks passed, I noticed a subtle yet profound shift in how I perceived relationships in general. I began to approach personal and professional connections with discernment, recognizing that respect for one another's goals, belief in potential, and alignment of values mattered far more than immediate gratification or emotional convenience. This understanding reshaped how I interacted, how I mentored, and how I navigated conflict. And in the quiet moments, when the city lights shimmered against the darkened sky and the hum of Austin drifted through my apartment, I allowed myself to feel satisfaction, not in vengeance, not in proving a point, but in the steady knowledge that I had preserved my integrity. The consequences of the past, Ryan's discomfort, the shift in social perception, the lessons learned by those who observed from the sidelines were secondary. My own evolution was the central truth. Walking home one evening after a long day of meetings, I realized I had crossed an invisible threshold. I was no longer the woman who doubted her dreams, feared ultimatums, or questioned her worth in someone else's eyes. I was whole, capable, and unapologetically aligned with the life I wanted. The fallout, as dramatic and revealing as it had been, was merely the natural consequence of courage, clarity, and consistency. Sitting on my balcony one evening, the city lights of Austin stretching endlessly before me, I felt a quiet sense of completion. The chaos, the heartbreak, the ultimatums, the tough decisions, they were all behind me. And yet, they had shaped me into someone stronger, wiser, and unapologetically myself. I realized that life isn't about avoiding pain or disappointment. It's about navigating them with integrity and emerging intact. I thought back to that Friday night, 3 years ago, when Ryan had forced me to choose between him and my career. At the time, it felt like a loss, like a sharp, unyielding wound in my chest. But now, I understood it differently. It wasn't a loss, it was a lesson. Choosing myself, choosing my dreams, had been the bravest, most necessary act of self-love I could have taken. That choice became the foundation of my success, my confidence, and my sense of worth. The experience also reshaped how I view relationships. True partnership isn't about ultimatums or forcing someone to abandon their goals for you. It's about believing in each other, even when the path forward is uncertain. It's about celebrating ambition, supporting growth, and finding ways to align lives without sacrificing core values. The right people don't diminish your dreams, they amplify them. As for Ryan, I realized that closure doesn't always require confrontation. I didn't need to see regret on his face or hear apologies to feel whole. My validation came from within, from knowing I had acted with honesty, courage, and clarity. I had reclaimed my story, and in doing so, I had reclaimed myself. I also began to see the ripple effects of my decisions on my professional and personal life. My team, my friends, my family. They saw me as someone who could navigate complexity, handle pressure, and maintain integrity. That quiet respect, that unspoken acknowledgement of my growth, meant more than any vindication or revenge could have. Sitting there, I finally allowed myself to smile. Not the fleeting smile of relief, but the deep, steady smile of someone who knows her worth. I had chosen not just my career, but my life, my principles, and my happiness. And I would choose them again, every single time. For anyone watching, listening, or reading this story, the people who try to make you choose between love and your dreams are not seeing the full picture. Your goals, your passion, your potential, they are part of who you are. Stand by them. Trust yourself. And remember, the right people will never ask you to give up on yourself. They will help you rise.